I think we can both agree that Mommy's a little bit nuts, right? I was thinking maybe we could join
We are talking Deadstream. This is written and directed by Joseph and Vanessa Winter. Joseph Winter actually stars in this movie as well as our main character, Sean. Now this is believe it or not, a found footage horror comedy. I don't ever recall seeing a horror comedy that's actually in a found footage style, but lo and behold, we have one here. And I have to say there's definite comparisons here to The Evil Dead 2, just in a much more contemporary setting. So let me give you a breakdown of the synopsis. So Sean is an internet personality. He's some type of YouTuber or a TikToker that does these kind of pranks and stunts, and his whole shtick is, you know, he does these stunts that are meant to be facing his fear. And he's had some success, but he's also had a little bit of notoriety in this as well. And this is his biggest fear, spending a night in a haunted house. So he goes into this, he finds this kind of haunted house and decides he's going to kind of spend the night there, locks himself in, takes the spark plugs out of his car so he can't kind of run away, sets up a variety of cameras in the kind of different rooms and things like this, and, you know, he's got a GoPro style camera to film the whole night essentially. And of course, this house is legitimately haunted with a quite malicious spirit. And obviously, as the movie goes on, things get kind of more bizarre, a little bit more wacky. And what will be the results? Well, you'll just have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works with Deadstream. In a very crowded type of kind of field, genre of films, haunted house films, found footage movies, this actually feels quite fresh. You know, when you boil it down, it's a haunted house film, but its approach is very contemporary, but it also has a lot of reverence for, I think, films of old as well, particularly the Evil Dead films. I've seen this kind of reference, the Blair Witch meets Evil Dead. It's not really like Blair Witch outside of its found footage, but I can certainly see some Evil Dead comparisons, and certainly the second half of the movie. So it's very much a fresh feeling, and it also, I think, speaks to a younger generation who are much more kind of in tune with like internet and YouTube personalities, because the character of Sean is essentially a kind of a send-up of the kind of the PewDiePies and those type of kind of characters and those type of internet kind of personalities, all of whom do these kind of like, you know, some arguably stupid things on kind of line and get kind of famous for it ultimately, and end up having to do kind of apologies because they've taken it too far. There's a lot of kind of like commentary on internet fame and internet celebrities and things like that, but still having a very much a tongue-in-cheek kind of tone to it, and a very kind of never taking itself kind of too seriously, never getting kind of too preachy or anything like that. So it really does feel very kind of fresh, and technology plays a big part in this movie as well. And I think this is maybe obviously what differentiates, you know, films now compared to, you know, the heyday of horror films, is because you have all this technology which you can use within the movie. And for example, the whole point here is that Sean is live streaming this night, and he's using all these kind of cameras and things like that you can kind of feed into, and have motion detectors, stuff like that all play kind of a big part in the movie. I have to say as well, Winter's portrayal of this kind of character of Sean, he is quite a likeable kind of guy. He does seem sort of, even though he's playing an internet celebrity, he still does seem somewhat relatable. You know, there's kind of trolls, for example, that are taking pot shots at, well, his acne and stuff like that, and so he's dealing with stuff that probably every day kind of people deal with to a certain degree, but certainly people online. So it kind of, you kind of feel like he is quite a relatable kind of character. So there's some decent work there in characterizations. Now, this is definitely a horror comedy, but I will say this movie does actually have some reasonable scares. Now, horror comedy is a strange beast in many ways, because, you know, where do you take it? Horror comedies you can kind of watch as a fun bit of entertainment, but they're never really actually scary. Are they ever really funny? That's obviously down to more of a personal preference. But this one, I would say, does actually have some reasonable kind of scary moments in it, or at least potentially scary moments, because I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it. But surprisingly, there is a fair amount of tension building. The actual location that they're shooting in, this kind of house, looks great. It really does look dilapidated. I mean, if you want to kind of go in an abandoned house, they have found a one that is, you know, barely kind of standing. It looks great, and I have to say the aesthetic of this kind of very rundown and remote house looks good. And the movie, you know, it wisely kind of starts off reasonably slow and somewhat more seriously, and kind of gets wackier as it kind of goes on. Although it still doesn't feel out of context with the film. The tone of the film somewhat kind of changes, but there's never like a jarring kind of like move into a different style. It kind of flows quite kind of naturally. Although there are some drawbacks to it, which I will come on to. But you never feel like you're going from, you know, dead scary to kind of like completely a different tone. It does feel relatively kind of well kind of paced and kind of well sort of put together. Now, this is a found footage movie, but they do actually have some fun ways of making it somewhat not a found footage film. For example, Sean puts a lot of kind of static cameras around the building. So, you know, we do see some kind of overhead shots and things like this. And he actually has like a cassette player which he plays music on. Obviously, he's doing a live stream, so he's trying to build the atmosphere. So we actually have a legitimate reason why there's kind of music playing and things like that, which I thought was kind of a quite a fun idea. The creature effects are a lot of fun. They do actually remind me a lot of kind of the practical effects that you would have seen certainly in the kind of the movies like Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. They feel very reminiscent of that. I mean, there are times when they do look a little bit cheap, but nonetheless, I kind of appreciate the effects of the effects being kind of practical and kind of gooey and kind of gross at the same time. And then the humour side of it. You know, it's a little bit of a mixed bag for me, which I'll come on to, but there are some moments here where I do feel it is quite fun. The movie is quite fun. It's a film that I think chooses this path to have it as a kind of a horror comedy. And some of the humour works better than others, but there are some things here that you do feel are fun. No, I was never laughing out loud personally, but there are some fun moments, and it does seem kind of like, it just so reminds you of like Ash just getting the, you know, the bejesus kind of beat out of him in the kind of the Evil Dead series of films. It kind of has that kind of like, you know, Three Stooges kind of vibe to it to a certain degree. Certainly, obviously influenced by Evil Dead. So if you like the kind of the comedic side of the Evil Dead series and films, then it has a kind of a similar vibe there. Even kind of some of the creature effects, I would say, are quite reminiscent, even but quite fun as well. So let's maybe transition to what doesn't work. I think this movie could have been legitimately scary had it dialed back on the comedy. Now, this may not be necessarily a criticism for everyone, because I think some people might genuinely like the more comedic side of it. But I actually have to say, had this movie played it straight, I think it would have been legitimately scary. And I think even with some of the kind of the gags, there is a, you know, I think you can still have them in there and still have this kind of level of fear. But to me, it went a little bit too silly and even spoofy at times. There's a scene, for example, where the character of Sean is kind of sitting on the floor or something, and we see like a entity between his legs and it bites his balls. And it's just like, oh, I don't know if that was like, it just went to a little bit too kind of silly. And then the kind of, it kind of does similar sort of things in like from that point on. And to me, it kind of like undercut some of the kind of the tension. Now, this was obviously by design. They didn't want to make a straight horror film. They wanted to make a horror comedy, which I think makes it does give it a unique flavour. It makes it stand out from the pack of the found footage movies. That and the kind of the interactive live stream kind of style that it has, interacting with the kind of the audience in the way that it does, which I thought was a good touch. But I do think it undercuts some of the kind of what could have been a legitimately kind of scary film. And I have to say, I feel like it's somewhat wasted. I'd almost like to see a alternate version of this, which has some of the comedy kind of stripped out and make it a little bit more a scary film, because, you know, a hardened horror fan won't be scared by that much these days, and I think this could have been one of these films. It could have been like a Grave Encounters style movie, which still had elements of humour, but it led more into the horror, whilst this one leans more into the comedy, than, if that makes sense. And some of it I think is a little bit too slapstick, a little bit too borders on spoof or kind of a parody and stuff like that. And I have to say, it maybe leans a little bit too much into the Evil Dead at times. I mean, I feel the second half, although it's fun and certainly kind of fast-paced and wacky, I'm thinking it's losing a little bit of its own identity and kind of becoming somewhat more of a Evil Dead style kind of like homage movie. Whilst I think the first half it maintained a little bit more of its own flavour, but it kind of gets lost to a certain degree in the second half when it comes really ballistic essentially. But it's still a fun movie. I have to say I did enjoy this movie quite a lot. It was a strong choice, strong choices, a likeable kind of character, a unique feel to it, and as a movie, I think it does some interesting things as a horror comedy which has some legitimately scary moments, but still kind of like ball to the wall comedy as well. I don't remember seeing anything where I felt like it was a horror comedy which actually had proper scary moments in. It didn't work 100% for me, but I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.